Hey guys, welcome to A Little Bit of Monica. If you know anything about me, you know that I love to read from multiple genres. And so today I am going to be giving you my top 5 books that I read in 2023 from each of my favorite genres. So I previously posted my video of my top 10 books from all of the books that I read in 2023. But that was incredibly hard to decide because I read 127 books and they spanned over multiple genres, and it's really hard sometimes to compare like a romance to a horror and try to pick like which one was my favorite when they are such different vibes, and it's hard to just like pit them against each other. So I decided to set it up this way as well, where I'm going to be giving my top 5 in each genre. So the 4 genres groupings that I'm going to be doing is romance, fantasy/fantasy romance, mysteries and thrillers, and horror. So this is going to help break it up a little bit. Obviously, all of the books in my top 10 are going to be in these categories, and so they're going to be a little bit of a repeat. If you already watched that video, I'm going to go pretty quickly through any of the top 10 picks, and I will link my top 10 video in the description so you can head over there to hear me talk about all of my top 10 books in a little bit more depth. But here I am going to go pretty quickly through them just because there are 20. Actually, I think I might have 21 because I believe I did one honorable mention for one of the categories. So with that many books, I am going to go pretty quickly through these, but I do want to give you an idea of some of the favorite books that I've been reading, even if they didn't quite make my top 10. So let's get started. I am going to start with the fantasy/fantasy romance category, and that is because all of my top 5 books were in my top 10. Which tells you that I clearly had a really good time with fantasy and fantasy romance this past year. And so because those are all repeats, I did add one honorable mention as the like 6th place for this category, and that is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. I really enjoyed reading this book, and this is a romance about a human who is in a like competition setting with a bunch of vampires. So she's competing against vampires who really love the smell of her blood. So it's just an all-around good time. It's intense. There are times where I was like on the edge of my seat, like what is about to happen? So I just really loved this one. I think I remember being specifically recommended from Cassidy and Mel having read and loved this book, and so I picked it up and also really loved it, and I'm really excited because I am going to be reading the sequel pretty soon. I haven't read it yet, although it's been out for like 2 months maybe, and I just haven't gotten around to it, but that is on my upcoming list of books to be reading. I'm not sure if it's going to be January or February, but I will be getting to that one pretty soon. Now to the other 5, and again, all 5 of these were in my top 10 video, so I'm going to just breeze through these pretty quickly. In 5th place was Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This book took me by surprise in December and launched into my top 10. It is a fantasy romance. It is basically the Hunger Games. Like, it's Hunger Games coded, and I was here for it. So much witty banter, and honestly a really, really, really precious romance. Like, I just loved them together. I just loved it. So this was an immediate, like, I knew the vibes were gonna place it straight into the top 10. Next up is in 4th place, Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Again, I knew this one very early on was going to be a favorite of mine. It is fantasy but has like a little bit of a historical war element, and I don't love historical fiction, but I ended up really, really, really loving this book. So I'm happy that it made it into my top 10 and also obviously the top 5 fantasy, and the sequel just came out at the end of December, so that's also really exciting, and I think it's just a duology. So after book 2, this one is all wrapped up. Moving on to 3rd place is Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. This is more of a cozy fantasy romance vibe. It's a little bit slower plot-wise, but I love the relationship between Evie, who is the assistant to the villain of the story, and their community. And it's like he has eyes for her. He's got that soft spot, and he's cold-hearted to everyone else. And honestly, I just love this. I just love this. It was a cozy, good feeling, so definitely recommend this one. In 2nd place, which is completely unsurprising, was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, and I kind of want to give a shout out to Iron Flame with this one too, because I loved it almost as much as I loved Fourth Wing, which I know a lot of people didn't love it quite as much, but this one will always have a special place in my heart just because of how infatuated I was with this story after reading it. I read this in May, and then I reread it again at the beginning of November before Iron Flame came out, and just I'm obsessed. I also have the first edition, which is just so exciting to me. I love this copy. I love this book. I love Xaden and Violet and just everything about it. This is such good vibes. The dragons, the relationship, the drama, everything about this. I love it. Moving on to the top book of my fantasy and fantasy romance category, which ironically is the top book of my 2023 reading year, was The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. This book is fantasy with a historical element as well, which shockingly, me who doesn't love historical fiction, put a historical fantasy-ish on the top of my list, but I ended up loving this book. It gave me every single good vibe that I could ever ask for. This again was a very slow story as far as not a lot of big exciting things happening, but it was beautiful. The writing was beautiful. The descriptions were so vibrant and vivid, and just everything about this was so good and unexpected. And I think maybe that's why it ended up so high on my list as the number one, is because of how unexpected this was. Like, I had never read from the author, but just so excited to have read this and ended up loving it so much that I ended up buying a special edition copy from Owl Crate, which I don't even get Owl Crate, so I had to buy this off of Pango, and now I'm very excited that I have both copies because it is so beautiful and the story itself was beautiful, and I'm just obsessed all around. Moving on to the second category that I want to talk about, I'm going to go into romance. Only 3 of my top 5 romances were in my top 10, so there are going to be 2 new ones that I talk about here. The first one is in 5th place, and that is Wildfire by Hannah Grace. This is the sequel to Icebreaker. I read Icebreaker and I really liked it. I think I gave it 4 stars, but Wildfire hit home a little bit more than Icebreaker did. Icebreaker is a spicy romance about an ice skater and an ice hockey player in college. With Wildfire, the main male character is on the same hockey team as the guy from the first book, but the girl, they end up working together at a summer camp. And I've been a summer camp counselor, and so this just kind of hit home really hard, and I loved the vibes. It was such a fun environment, and I thought the characters were great. I just had such a good time with this. Was it perfect? No, but like it was a great time, and it felt more personal to me just from like my own life experiences working at a summer camp. And also, I think their relationship was really beautiful. So I really liked this one. The spicy scenes were giving spicy scenes, and it was so good. Like, I can't even complain. I really loved Wildfire. The second book on my list is a repeat author from another category, and this is The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. I have read other Rebecca Yarros romances, and well, okay, I read one other than this, so she has like her Fourth Wing fantasy, but then she has a bunch of romances, and I read one other one and I did not like it. I should have DNF'd it. It was before I was in my DNF era, and I should have DNF'd it. However, this one, immediately a favorite. Again, this is another like historical romance type story. What is it with me and historical stories being like really good? It's like hit or miss, I guess. But this story follows Georgia, whose grandmother was a well-renowned romance author. I think she was a romance author. Anyway, her grandmother dies, and there was a book that was left unfinished. They hire another author to come in and finish the story. However, Georgia does not like his writing, and so they are at each other's throats trying to make sure that the story is done correctly, it is done to her honor, and they are reading these old letters that Georgia's grandmother had exchanged with her past lover. And it is just this beautiful painted a picture of a love story from when her grandmother was actually in the war. I believe they were pilots, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, World War II pilots. And so it's just this like really poignant story that I cried so many times. I remember reading this in my hammock on my family's camping trip, and I was like pulling the sides of the hammock up over my head so that my sisters couldn't see that I was crying a lot and like screaming. I was texting Michelle because she had read this before me and was the one that told me to read this, and I was texting her in all caps just screaming my head off about how much I loved the story and was freaking out over everything that was happening. So this was just such a beautiful love story. It is very much like a romance, not a romantic comedy. But I honestly loved this so very much that it made it into my top 5 romance books. And the final 3 books that are on my top 5 romances are also in my top 10 of the year. And the number 3 spot is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This is a supernatural romance about a vampire and a werewolf. And oh my gosh, this was unexpected because it's Ali Hazelwood, but I loved it so very much that it made it into my top 5 romance books. The number 2 spot is another Ali Hazelwood, and that is Check and Mate. And I also have 2 copies of this because I love this book so very much. It is so good. It is a YA romance, so the spice is like super dialed down. There's like practically none, and I loved it just as much as if there was any, because honestly, I don't read books for the smut, for the spice. I really enjoy the actual romance itself. And I loved the romance in this. Also, I loved the romance and the chess. The chess that was in this, like I love chess. I have said it before. Chess fascinates the heck out of me. I'm terrible at it, but it fascinates me, and so this love story was beautiful and I loved it and I want to reread it again already. Finally, the top romance book that I read of the year was Till There Was You by Lindsay Hamaroff, and this book actually is an ARC and it's not even out yet. I think it comes out in February, and I am impatiently awaiting the release of this book because I loved it so very much. It was about a chef and an up-and-coming musician. Their beautiful love story. I was kicking, screaming, crying, laughing. Everything about it was so good. It was Monica coded. It felt like it was written specifically for me, and for that, I love it so much. So that is the top 5 books in the romance category. Now moving on to my top 5 thrillers and mysteries. I feel like I read a lot of thrillers and mysteries, but it's harder for them to stick out enough to be top contenders for my top 10. So unfortunately, none of these 5 made it into my top 10 of the year. So these are all going to be brand new reveals for you guys, but I really thoroughly enjoyed all of them. They were all 5-star reads, and let's just get into them. The first one in 5th place is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This one, I did go to a book signing event and got the book signed, so that's really exciting, and I think that also like helps me want to enjoy the book a little bit more. But this book is about a caretaker who goes to take care of an elderly woman in her house on like the edge of a cliff, and the caveat is that everyone thinks that this woman murdered her entire family, and so now the main character goes in to kind of feed the curiosity and find out the truth for herself. I really thoroughly enjoyed this story. It had a lot of action. I feel like a lot of things were constantly happening, and Riley Sager just writes thrillers so well. He is one of my favorite thriller writers, and so this instantly became a favorite of the year, and I'm really glad that it made the top 5 cut because it deserves it, but there were so many other good thrillers. I am really just glad that this one made the top 5. And then the 4th book on my list is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. I also met Lisa Jewell at a book signing event, so I got this one signed as well, and I just really loved this book. It was dark, it was gritty, it was mind-bending. There was a lot of rethinking and paranoia going on. This is about a podcaster who interviews someone else that has, I think, the same birthday. I think they were birthday twins, and she starts to discover a lot of the dark secrets that this other girl is uncovering to her. There is an unhealthy attachment going on in this book, and there's a very unhealthy relationship portrayed in this book, and it made me so uncomfortable, but like in a good way. Like I loved the way this was portrayed. The story kept going. Twists and turns were like around every corner, and I just really loved this book and can't stop saying enough good things about it. This was my first Lisa Jewell. Honestly, I will absolutely be buying other books from her because it was so good. Book 3 of my mystery and thriller category is Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. This is her newest release that came out, I think, in October of 2023. This was our book club pick in November for the Pyramid Book Club, and I loved this book. This story follows our main character who lives in a very religious, strict Southern Baptist community in Louisiana, I believe. and they just believe that a lot of things are bad, and she wants to believe differently. And then they discover that someone was murdered in the swamp, and she starts to unravel a lot of secrets and finds out a lot of secrets about people that she would never have expected, uncovers the truth, and things just continue to unravel and unravel. And it's such a gripping story. Ugh. And it's so dark. Ashley Winstead, she writes magnificently dark stories that are captivating and make you think and also not think at the same time. Also, the ending of this book, I'm still not over it. I am still not over the ending of this book, and it was like 2 months ago that I read this. But Ashley Winstead, you still owe me an explanation. Now for book 2 in this category, it goes to Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. This book was shockingly good, shockingly dark, and it follows our main character, Sally, who she does not understand things the way that other people do, and she misinterprets a lot of things. And when her father dies, she is then tasked with a lot of responsibilities and starts to uncover a lot of secrets about her life that she would never have known, and it starts to unravel everything that she has ever known. And it's just so good. It's so dark, it's so twisted, and there's a lot of really heavy material addressed in this book, but it is so good. And oh my goodness, like, just thinking back to reading that book, it was so good. Lexi and Michelle read it before I did, and they're like the main reason why I ended up picking it up in the first place. And oh my god, like, it was intense, but it was so good. Like, I can't even remember all the like details. I just remember being so shocked by everything that was happening, and the depth and the dark themes that were addressed. And honestly, that's what I look for when I'm going into a thriller. As bad as it sounds, I'm looking for it to be dark and gritty. And so that is why I also have a very, very dark novel as my number 1 that I read in 2023. My favorite thriller that I read in the year was The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. I mentioned before that I love Ashley Winstead, and honestly, this book was so freaking good, but it was so dark. There are a lot of triggers, so I highly advise that you are checking for that. The story follows a young woman who escaped from a hostage kidnapping situation where she was kind of in a cult at one point. Anyway, she ends up escaping, her and her friend, but then later on, the past is brought back up when a podcaster comes to town and starts to ask her questions, and they're going to find out some new secrets that uncover a lot of the darkness that she had encountered and had yet to encounter as well. This book is so hard, but so good. Like, I read this back in May and have not stopped thinking about it, so I definitely recommend this for lovers of dark thrillers. And just Ashley Winstead in general, anything that she has written is absolutely incredible, and I love this book, and so it is very firmly at the top of my thriller list for 2023. And now finally, we come to the final category, and that is my horror books. I read a lot of horror in 2023, but I have officially narrowed it down to my top 5, and only 2 of these made it into my top 10 for the year. So let's start with number 5, which is Just Like Mother by Anne Heltzel. This book is also very dark. This one is about a woman who also escapes from her situation where she was in a cult. And she discovers later on that another girl who was in the cult with her lives not too far away. She ends up reuniting and starts to discover a lot of the secrets that this sister from this home that she had been raised in is hiding, and things go very, very wrong. There are some really creepy babies, and every time I look at this cover I think of Lexi and the recreation she did for Halloween 2022, and honestly, it's everything. This book is terrifying to look at. It's also terrifying to read. It's very dark, it's twisty, it's messed up, but it was such a good read. Moving on to the number 4 book on my list, which was The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. I love Katrina Ward. She is an automatic buy and read for me. This was the second book that I read from her. I read Sundial first. I ended up loving this one a lot more, and then I read Looking Glass Sound afterward, and this one is still my favorite. This book is about, oh my god, what even is it about? I don't know how to explain what this book is about. It's about a cat, it's about a man, it's about a girl, it's about a woman looking for her missing sister, and it's about all those things and more. The cat is simply spectacular. I love what Katrina Ward did with the cat. I love the twistiness of the story, the way that Katrina Ward writes and makes you question everything, and then you finish the book and you question everything again, and then you can reread the book and realize, oh my god, this woman is a genius. So like, this book is everything. Is my favorite Katrina Ward book that I have read, and I really look forward to whatever she manages to put out next. Coming up in third place for the horror category is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. This book was so good because it hit home so well. It's been out long enough that I think most people know that there are some really creepy dolls in this book, and they are so disturbing. They are puppets, and Pupkin is the main culprit. He is creepy. The audiobook was properly horrifying, and honestly I just love this book, but also because I have personal interactions with people who do puppetry in a very similar fashion to the way that they are used in this book, and so it just felt very personal to me. yeah, it felt personal. So yeah, that made this even more terrifying because I know people who do puppetry, and I don't ever want to see them ever again after reading this book. It was properly horrifying. Also, I did meet Grady Hendrix, and he signed this book, and he uses special stamps with each different book that he has. So this is the one that I got with mine. It was so incredible meeting him and knowing, oh my god, how good this book was. I love this book. The last two books that I have here are also signed because I also met the author. These two were on my top 10, so you will already be familiar, but they are The Carrow Haunt by Darcy Coates and From Below by Darcy Coates. I read The Carrow Haunt first, and this was immediately my new favorite Darcy Coates. I read From Below a few months later, and it immediately became my new favorite Darcy Coates. From Below is my number one for sure, but The Carrow Haunt is a close second. And again, I did get these signed from Darcy Coates. Meeting her, I can't even remember when this was, back in like June, I think, when Lexi and I went on a road trip to go meet her. This book is so appropriately spooky. Darcy Coates does the hauntings so freaking well. I love her atmosphere and her spookiness, and From Below does the perfect haunting and underwater horror that was terrifying and amazing, and I loved it so much. It was realistic horror because they were underwater and they were using like actual, you know, underwater mechanisms that could malfunction, and that had me properly terrified right from the beginning. So this was definitely scary for me personally, but also just scary in general because she writes this style and this kind of vibe, the spooky, eerie, creepy, dark setting so wonderfully. I love Darcy Coates, so that was easily my top horror book of the year. But with all of that, those are my top 21 books of the year throughout my 4 categories that I typically read. It is so fun getting to read so many genres, but it does make it incredibly difficult to pick favorites by the end of the year because you know, like, it's so hard to pit one against the other when they are so very different in vibe, in feeling, and all of that. So I found this really fun to be able to break it up a little bit more and talk a little bit more about some of my favorites. Also because I didn't vlog a whole lot during 2023, so some of these books I didn't really get to talk about too much, and I'm just really excited to be able to share how much I loved them. If you read any of these and also loved them, please let me know. I would love to hear what you thought. If there's some that you haven't read yet, I would also love to hear if you are going to pick them up now, because seriously, they made it into my top 5 of each genre because I loved them so much, and I really hope that other people would love them too. Some of them have been out for quite a while, so I hope that you decide to pick them up if you haven't read them yet. Again, I will mention that my top 10 video where I talk more in depth about how much I loved and what I loved about my top 10 books, I will have that linked in the description, so you can go head over there to watch that. But please, if you are interested in sticking around for future videos where I will be talking about even more books that I love and maybe some that I end up hating, please don't forget to subscribe so that you can come along with me on my journey in 2024 as I continue to read and just fall in love with books. I am so glad that you're here with me, and I want to thank you so much for watching this video, and I truly hope that I will see you in the next one. Bye!